Aboriginal folks of this land, because they'll start trying to stake claims to some of the land when we start allocating resources. When they knew they were going to start allocating resources to native tribes and people who were indigenous, they had to cut that out and just tell all of us that, hey, all of y'all came from somewhere in Africa. Tell all of us that, hey, all of y'all came from somewhere in Africa. So I understand that we did. Go ahead.
All right, so that brings me to another question that I asked, right? Mm-hmm. And that question, and let me know, this thing is going in and out. Twitter needs to really fix this thing, because this, I don't know if y'all can hear me clear, but everybody else is just sounding choppy. All right, cool. So that brings me to another question, right? So we know that there are records. So we know that there are records, and you've already stated that you're not one of those slave ship deniers. And if anybody was to ask me, yeah, Tariq be on it like that, no, brother Tariq Nasheed he's not one of the people that say that. Now, I may disagree with some of the other stuff, but he's not one of the people that say that, right?
No,
so,
not at all.
Right? What records do we have? And again, I'm not going to deny that it didn't happen. That's one, because as a Moorish scholar, I've already documented the early Moorish presence in America, and a bunch of stuff. I went at it with Renoko Rashidi when he tried to come at my neck one time. So, I've documented it. So, when did the natives get enslaved, right? And let me qualify the question, and I don't want to be long-winded, but I want to qualify the question. En route. So whether we take this story as truth or not, and there's some issue about it being true, that's not the point. The point that I want to pull out of that is this: that Kunta, according to this story, right, had a history. And he knew who his mother and father was, and their mother, as far back as it can go. And when he had his child, I believe her name was Kizzy, he relayed to her, you are Kizzy, daughter of, Kunta, yada, yada, yada. There was a lineage trace that he relayed orally. Again, I'm not saying, because some people will be like, Roots wasn't even real. Brother, that's not the point that I'm making. The point that I'm making is there are oral traditions passed down. And if we don't have any documentation that says, okay, well, not only that the Europeans say, not only did we bring Africans over here, we also enslaved natives that were on this land, native black. We all put them into one slave labor camp, aka plantation. And, now we can say, okay, we have documentation of that. We don't even have brothers or sisters that's making this claim stepping up to say, this is in fact oral history. My great-great-great-grandfather encountered Europeans first in 1639. He was a part of this tribe or that tribe. They had this custom or that custom or that custom. Like, this becomes the hang-up. So how would you then answer that question?
Well, the thing is with oral traditions, again, since things weren't documented like that, and a lot of things weren't documented because foundational Black Americans were not allowed to read and write at one point. Also, oral traditions, they get lost over generations. But there were some documents showing that there were Black people here who did have indigenous roots, as we talk about people like Crispus Attucks, the man who took a bullet for the United States in the Revolutionary War, in the beginning of the war. Crispus Attucks, he was part indigenous. His mother was indigenous. But he was classified as a Black man. Going back into early Virginia and Massachusetts, there was an enslaved Black Aboriginal woman named Tituba. who was a part of that Salem witch trial. And they have no tracing of her coming here from Africa. This was a black person who was Aboriginal. I would like people to look up Tituba and the Salem witch trial. The whole thing was about her teaching voodoo to these white women. This was a black Aboriginal woman. So there are scarce records like that. And also in the early Virginia area, when they were enslaving people, a lot of the natives were Aboriginal people. And we got this whole narrative that the Native Americans, meaning the red, when we say Native Americans, people usually automatically associate that with the Mongoloid red people. They say that the natives didn't get enslaved because they knew the area and they would run away. That logically, that wouldn't make sense, because if you can put some people on a reservation, you can put them on a plantation. So who were the people on the plantation? You can put some people on a reservation, you can put them on a plantation. So who were the people on the plantation? We have to ask very logical questions like that.
Aston, are you here? Go ahead and talk.
I'm almost here. I just want to put out a common sense thing. Native Americans were, a lot of them were wiped out. Native Americans were, a lot of them were wiped out by smallpox. And if you don't know, smallpox is an African disease that Africans knew about, have been dealing with for thousands of years, and knew how to treat. There's actually a story of a Bostonian slave, Onesimus, that basically explained to his slave master during the outbreak that we know about smallpox, and this is what we do. And so he goes on and pops a pustule of smallpox on one person with a needle, and uses that needle to inoculate other people in the town, and it works, and he saves the town from a smallpox outbreak. So Africans knew about smallpox. How are Africans trading with Americans, Native Americans, for thousands of years? Africans who know about smallpox and are living amongst Native Americans, and then Europeans come over to the America and bring smallpox, which just wipes out natives. And that's something they should already know about, because they've been dealing with Africans for thousands of years. Common sense, it makes no sense. It makes no sense. And when you talk about what did they trade, that's not semantics. That is actual proof. You can dig up seeds. You can carbon date seeds. You can know this plant originates over here, and it was brought to place B by people B.
Okay, well, let me ask you. Okay, let me ask you. If smallpox, why are they native today, sir?
Let him finish.
So tomatoes, potatoes, corn, certain peppers, those things are indigenous to the Americas. They don't show up around the world until colonization of Europeans. I don't know what Italians were doing before 500 years ago, but it wasn't pasta, because they didn't have tomatoes. Irish, they didn't have a potato famine. No.
I don't hear anything.
Yeah, I don't hear anything either.
Me either.
Okay. Yeah, so my question to my good brother is, based on that logic, if the smallpox wiped out all the Native Americans, why are there still Native Americans now? The Mongoloid redskin Native Americans. If that's the case, if they're alive, black Aboriginals would still be alive too, based on logic. This is real simple logic. This is not rocket science. People are trying to make this shit more complicated than what it is. It's not rocket science. People are trying to come up with these semantical arguments. Family, it's very simple. The smallpox didn't kill everybody. It didn't kill all the Native Americans. It didn't kill all the black Aboriginal people. Some of them are still here, the red Mongoloid Native Americans, and many of us Aboriginal black people who mixed in with the black people brought over from Africa, we're still here. It's that simple. People can survive certain outbreaks and things. In Europe, there was a plague that killed millions of people in Europe. It didn't kill all of them. Many of them survived. So people survive plagues. It's that simple. This is not rocket science.
All right, so I have 3 questions for you.
Go ahead, sir.
All right, really quick. Let me just.
Hey, so my question is this: I've been trying to actually get in touch with you on the few stages you've been on, because there's a big problem that's brewing. Your followers, they're denying the slave trade in its entirety, and they're denying slavery. Now, I've heard you acknowledge slavery did happen. I heard you acknowledge the slave trade did happen. So that's not the question
I would like for you to, and when you do speak to these people, that you do clarify to them what you're saying in its full context, and not making it seem like 100% of Black Americans are Indians, because a lot of the people that follow you have not done their genealogy. Like, real talk. You probably did your family tree. Sounds like you probably have. But if you, as you know, by the seventh generation, you have over 128 great grandparents. So for anybody to allude or think that 100% of their great grandparents came from Indians, for anybody to allude or think that 100% of their great grandparents came from Indians and not any other admixture or any other ethnicity or group of people or tribe or another continent for that matter. A lot of us Black Americans have over seven different so the question that I have for you, Tariq, is number one, what is your stance on political involvement? Number two, what's your stance on the Freedmen classification? And number three is, do you believe that majority of Black Americans are tied directly to Indians, or majority of Black Americans have ties to the slaves that were...
I didn't catch that last part, sir.
I was asking you, do you think that the majority of Black Americans...
Is the brother still here?
Yeah, he's talking here.
Yeah, we can
I
hear him.
didn't catch my brother's last question. But
Okay,
the first one was, what I think about politics? Do I think
political involvement of
the
Black
majority of Black people have... Hello? Okay.
Yeah, you muted yourself, I think.
Okay, yeah. Well, now, the first question about politics, the last one was about indigenous. What was the second question?
The first one was, what do you believe? What do you think about political involvement? The second one was, what is your stance on the freedmen? Right.
Okay.
And the third was, how many people do you think out of Black Americans have ties? You could say a rough percentage or majority or minority or small or whatever you feel will capture your answer. How many of us do you think are tied to 100% or has people tied to Indian versus people who are absent of any ancestry from Africa?
Right. I think now that number might be hard to quantify, because like we've been saying, there is no records and Black people could not keep records. It's my conjecture that I would say the majority of foundational Black Americans have African and Black Aboriginal bloodline in this country, because we've been here so long. We've been here longer than any other group documented. Going back to the first question about what's my views on politics, everything you do is political to a certain degree. Politics is not just voting. Politics is how you move as a group and understand what's needed tangibly for your culture. This is why I'm so big on us as foundational Black Americans understanding who we are and what our culture is, so that we will automatically and instinctively move in ways that's going to benefit our culture and a group tangibly. We've been doing this thing where, as Black people, we open the door and say, hey, we Black and everybody's Black like us, and we're all one big kumbaya family, and you don't even have to be Black. As long as we're a minority, we got a global minority coalition, and that's politically immature. So we're getting out of this political immaturity, because other groups feed off our naivete and use that for their advantage. So that type of thing has to stop, and it stops when we become more culturally conscious and understand what our group is and what makes our group unique. This is why we point this stuff out, and this is why a lot of people have a problem with foundational Black Americans acknowledging their culture and distinguishing themselves. Because when you call yourself a foundational Black American, that's an exclusionary term. Now, you asked the question about freedmen. What I think about the freedmen thing is we do need to have the Freedmen's Bureau again. When they had the Freedmen's Bureau after the Civil War, that was a good thing. And then they dismantled it after they got everybody's money and fucked everybody's money off. But they never dismantled the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So we do need to reestablish the Freedmen's Bureau again, a new one, so that we can differentiate who's who. We can get these records straight, find out whose lineage can trace back to slavery. And I've always said it's very easy to trace some of this stuff back. If you're If you can trace your family census to the lineage to the 1870 census or even the 1900 census, most likely you are a person who was involved in slavery or somebody who was a free Black person in America. So that would make you a foundational Black American. But as far as politics, we as foundational Black Americans have to get our culture thing together, because other groups, when they come to us getting the benefits and the resources that we fight for, they understand that they're coming in as a culture, and when they get resources, they exclude us from sharing in their cultural gains.
But they're coming in as a protected culture, so I just want to make sure that we do understand, or maybe, I hope, hopefully we'll come to a conclusion that we've always have established to one degree or another a unique culture, and that was delineated or isolated from other cultures, but it's always been crushed because of what policy has allowed. There's been no protections for us, not financially, economically, even when we speak on the different tactics they've used, such as eminent domain or the sweeping under the rug of atrocity that has occurred, in certain cities and in counties, like out here in Georgia. I mean, about many counties and lynchings that were just, people were able to walk up to the jail and literally tie you to the back of a bandwagon and drag you. There was no political protection. There was no federal protections. And what I'm saying is, how can we talking about, like, we understand that we have to establish culture, but the reason why we have to constantly go through this cycle is because on a macro level, on a political level, we haven't established the grounding and representation. So wouldn't it be wise that we, as people in all our communities, we get locally involved? Wouldn't it be wise that, I hear a lot of your platforms, but my issue is, like, yeah, sometimes it's funny, like when you're going out with the people, but I don't hear the political agenda being embedded as far as, planting a seed in people's minds. Because what I'm hearing from, like, your followers, like your people, they use the FBA and even the FBA hashtag to make a stance that the notion that getting into politics is suicide because you're dealing with white people, and anything to do with white people, you're not going to get anything.
Okay,
you're not going to gain anything.
Okay, let's try this, because I've heard you make this reference. My followers, I don't have an organization, sir. Let's be clear. And whatever somebody on Twitter say, that's on them. You're going to have to ask them. I don't represent a group. I don't have any followers. So I'm not here to explain somebody else's ideology. So with respect, if you have a question for me or something that I've said,
my apologies. I mean, you have influence.
Because
you have influence.
but I can't. Right? There's 40 million people out here, man. I don't know what you heard, brother. So I can only speak for myself. And
okay, sorry. Then can I
I digress, but you answered my questions though, so no problem. Appreciate that, man.
Okay, so since you cannot speak for everyone else, you don't have an organization. Now, when you're talking about Black people having a type of cultural awareness, and that is going to help center us in being able to do politics, do you understand the level of division that you've helped create with the origins of the FBA and the Black Aboriginals? Because that is another now fracture within the Black community. We're already fractured by religion. So now we have people who are Aboriginal, who are not descendants of American chattel slavery, who also want to be included in the reparations claim. That convolutes the claim. So now we have people who are Aboriginal, who are not descendants of American chattel slavery, who also want to be included in the reparations claim. That convolutes the claim. So
I'm not a part of that. I don't know what that is, so I'm not responsible for that. You're saying that I'm part of that type of division, and I have no idea what you're talking about, ma'am. So I said.
So you didn't create this idea of Black Aboriginals and giving people that information? So you didn't create this idea of Black Aboriginals and giving people that information? That is part of why people started, quote unquote, digging into their lineage, and now they're going by, Wolffoot, right? dig into their lineage, and now they're going by, Wolffoot, right? It started with you. It started with you. It started with you. So
Ma'am, what are you talking about?
if you're not aware of it, you started these conversations on your podcast. You started these conversations on your podcast. You started these conversations on your podcast about Black people foundational to Black America. Did you not? Is that incorrect?
If you're gonna, ma'am.
Let me hold on,
ma'am. Okay, let me address, ma'am. Now you're being passive aggressive, ma'am. I'm trying to answer. You cut me off, so now you're
I didn't cut you off. I asked you.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am. You're making up a narrative, and you're arguing with your own straw man argument, ma'am. So if you're doing that, you're not arguing in good faith. If this is a room where we're going to talk in good faith, I will talk in good faith. Now you're making up straw man arguments, ma'am, and now it's sounding very passive aggressive. You've already made two false claims. You said that I'm causing division, ma'am. With some of these other groups, we're not rocking together. We've been the ones extending the olive branch. There are groups over here who come here, look at us as Akatas and Jairs and all of these derogatory names, and they go out of their way to not rock with us. They go out of their way to tell their children, when we go over there, stay away from those Akatas. Ma'am, this is not me. My family never told me no nonsense like that. I don't tell my children that, and most foundational Black Americans don't tell their people to stay away from African and Caribbean brothers and sisters. Ma'am, don't ever say no stuff that I'm causing division. Ma'am, I've created the best-selling history series on earth, Hidden Colors, about global Black history. I've been over to Africa donating and giving money and extending olive branches all over the continent.
Tariq Nasheed, I'm talking about within the Black American community. I'm not talking. I'm
offended by you saying that, ma'am.
I asked if you are aware that this conversation that you sparked with foundational Black Americans, and Black Americans being foundational here, and we're descendants of Aboriginals, that created another group of Black people who are separating themselves from American descendants of chattel slavery.
Ma'am,
that is what I'm asking, if you're aware of it.
Ma'am, are you aware that other immigrant groups don't often view themselves as us? They view us as.
But we're not talking about immigrants. I'm talking about Black Americans who experienced American chattel slavery. Is what I'm talking
about. If you are a foundational Black American who can trace your lineage to slavery, you are a foundational Black American. There is no division among foundational Black Americans. What are you talking about, ma'am?
Well, yes, there is, because there's people who say the slave trade never existed. Slave trade never existed. Slavery doesn't. Slavery didn't exist. They're saying that.
Yo, that's them top cat people, man. That's them top cat people, man.
I don't know who y'all talking about people. I don't even know who you talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. That has nothing.
Tariq, you just led a whole stage with the guy, Mel. You just led a whole stage with like your one of your trending topics. You just led a stage. He literally the day before and prior said that the slave trade did not happen. That the slave trade did not happen, and was asking people where are the ships.
I don't agree with that. I didn't hear him say that.
He's one of your gung-ho cronies. And I'm just telling you that this is the influence you have.
Okay.
That's not.
That I don't agree with that.
That's not where that comes. That's not where that comes from. That's not where that comes from.
Logic. Can you clarify?
Yeah. So a lot of the people in the metaverse, you see them in the same spaces, so they look like they're all together. But me and for the people who don't know, the United Sons and Daughters of Freedmen and Be the Power Incorporated, we know who all the prime factors in all of this confusion are. The United Sons and Daughters of Freedmen and Be the Power Incorporated, we know who all the prime factors in all of this confusion are. We know who all the prime
factors and all of this confusion are. And if you anyone of y'all who follow our program and platform, we've addressed all of it. We've addressed all of it for the past year and a half, 2 years. Right. And so now some of these groups, they listen to both platforms. And so they convolute the different messages together when you bump into them in the metaverse. Right. But it's a big convolution. But I did, before I go, I did hear something earlier that I wanted to speak to. Two different things, actually. Right. And the one thing I do want to say, right, when you talk about the American freedman and its political status, a lot of people say, we never been protected. We never had no economic protection. We never had no physical protection. But see, the politics and power is a balancing act. And so it's always teetering and hanging in the balance. And so we have the greatest protection history and the greatest violation history. And so we were physically protected greater than any other group when the military presence was in the South. And so we were physically protected greater than any other group when the military presence was in the South. But with the passing of Posse Comitatus, that protection was pulled out of the South. The 14th Amendment is the biggest protection legislation ever written in American history, but the enforcement of it is the issue, and the misunderstanding of state power opposed to federal power, and how that balance and that particular theater of political warfare has gone back and forth throughout American history. Most people don't really understand that, right? And so there's a lot of people that talk about things without really understanding the subject matter. There's a lot of people that talk about things without really understanding the subject matter. And so they just say stuff. Right? And so we got to really understand when you talk about Reconstruction, you talk about slavery, we know that slavery is a political status. It's a status in America where you're cut off and you're in private bondage. And then freedman is a political status that lets anyone know that you once previously had the status of slave, but now you do not have that status as slave no more. You are a freedman from private bondage. Now, the problem was after they pulled the troops out and overthrew Reconstruction, because Reconstruction didn't fail, it was overthrown in one of the greatest events in political history in America. And so when it was overthrown, they pulled the troops out. It was a series of policy. They pulled the military troops out. You understand? Murdered people, killed lots and lots of people, murder, right? And so they established a situation where instead of getting the freedmen being having a system to transfer us into full citizenship, we went from private bondage to public subjugation under state law and state and local policy, right? And so, but what I do want to add, that's a whole, we could talk for hours about that. But what I do want to ask a question, for what I heard Brother Nasheed say earlier, when in regards to the Indian situations and whatnot, right? He said that, and you can, if I'm gonna summarize, and you said it a little while ago, and any time you feel I misrepresent what you said, please correct me. And so you said that the Europeans, the American government rather, right, when they became time for them where they said that they decided they were going to allocate resources and funds and make up an agreement with the Indians, they made a concentrated effort to separate that knowledge from the so-called black Indians so that they wouldn't have claim on the land. They made a concentrated effort to separate that knowledge from the so-called black Indians so that they wouldn't have claim on the land. And so if that is the case, I'm confused on that, because most of the greatest resource distribution and business that was done with them was done with the 5 civilized tribes. And so in all all 5 civilized tribes have treaties to where they enforce the 13th Amendment and made the part of the treaty agreements that the red Indians, for lack of for a shared understanding, had to give the black Indians, who were now freedmen now through this treaty, made them freedmen through the various nations, and said that they had to give them full tribal membership and end their system of slavery in order to get treaties with the American government, because they fought with the Confederacy. And so if they would still hold that claim, right? Because they got full membership. So I don't understand. I'm puzzled. So I'm puzzled. I'm puzzled on the part where there was, I don't know if it happened in a meeting or if it was like some sessions in Congress where they said, we're not going to let the Negroes know that they were Indians. We're not going to let the Negroes know that they were Indians so that they don't have claim on the land, but we're going to make sure that the 5 civilized tribes and their freedmen understand that they have this connection, and then we're going to enforce full citizenship on these tribes. And so I just really would like for you to flesh out that little statement that you said there.
Right, and with the 5 civilized tribes, the Treaty of 1866, it says that the black freedmen are supposed to get the exact allocated resources as the other red men. Do you know? You know that has not been enforced. That's a big problem now. Dr. Claude Anderson is still trying to take those claims to court. They just don't enforce it, even though it's on paper, it's on record. They do not enforce that. There's still certain tribes fighting for that now. The Seminole tribes, they've been fighting for that.